You've been trying to feel enough for longer than you realize. Not always consciously, but it's there. In the way you measure yourself, in the way you compare, in the quiet dissatisfaction that follows even your best moments. You achieve something, and for a second, it feels like it worked, like you finally reached it. But the feeling doesn't stay. It fades, and something else returns. Subtle at first, then familiar. It's not enough. I could have done better. I should be further than this. And just like that, you're back where you started, chasing something you can't seem to hold on to. You tell yourself it's motivation, standards, growth, discipline. But if you look closely, it doesn't feel like growth. It feels like pressure, constant, unrelenting. No matter what you do, there's always a gap between where you are and where you think you should be. And that gap never closes. Carl Jung understood something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The feeling of not being enough doesn't come from what you lack. It comes from what you've rejected, not outside you, inside you. Because from the beginning, you learned something quietly, that certain parts of you were acceptable and others were not. You learn what to show, what to hide, what to express, and what to suppress, not through one moment, through repetition, through reactions, through subtle signals from the people around you. Approval, when you behaved a certain way. Disapproval, when you didn't. And over time, you adapted. You shaped yourself to fit what was accepted. You built an identity around what worked, around what got recognition, validation, connection. Carl Jung called this the persona, the version of you designed to function in the world, to be liked, to be accepted, to belong. And it works. It helps you navigate life. It allows you to connect, but it comes at a cost, because everything that doesn't fit into that persona doesn't disappear. It becomes the shadow, the parts of you you learned to hide, the traits you suppressed, the emotions you rejected, the impulses you judged. And here is where the problem begins. Because the more you identify with the persona, the more you distance yourself from the rest of who you are. And that distance creates a fracture, an internal split between who you are and who you allow yourself to be. And that split is what you feel as not enough, not because you are lacking, because you are divided. Part of you is expressed, part of you is hidden, and no amount of achievement can resolve that division, because you are trying to feel whole while rejecting half of yourself. So you compensate. You try to become more successful, more attractive, more disciplined, more impressive, hoping that if the persona becomes strong enough, it will finally feel like enough. But it never does, because the issue is not strength, it's separation. You are building one side of yourself while ignoring the other, and the ignored part doesn't stay silent. It influences you from beneath awareness, through doubt, through insecurity, through that quiet feeling that something is missing, even when everything looks right, even when everything should feel enough. This is why the feeling persists, not because you haven't done enough, because you haven't integrated enough, because the parts of you you've pushed away are still there, still active, still influencing how you see yourself. And as long as they remain rejected, you will feel incomplete, not because you are incomplete, because you are not fully acknowledged. This is the truth most people avoid, because it's easier to chase improvement than to face what you've rejected. It's easier to build the persona than to confront the shadow, because the shadow doesn't always look the way you expect. It's not just weakness. It's not just insecurity. Sometimes it's strength you were told was too much, confidence that was discouraged, anger that was suppressed, desires that didn't fit expectations, parts of you that were never allowed to exist freely. So you buried them. And in doing so, you didn't become better. You became partial. And partial never feels like enough, because something inside you knows there is more, not more to achieve, more to acknowledge. And until that acknowledgement happens, the feeling doesn't go away. It follows you through every goal, every milestone, every moment that should feel complete, but doesn't. Because completion does not come from perfection. It comes from integration, from bringing back what you've pushed away, from seeing yourself without filtering, without deciding what is acceptable and what is not. But that requires something most people avoid: honesty, not with others, with yourself. The kind of honesty that doesn't protect your image, that doesn't maintain your identity, that looks directly at what you've been avoiding. And once you begin to look, something shifts, not immediately, but undeniably. You start to notice the patterns, the moments where you hold back, the moments where you perform, the moments where you try to be what you think you should be instead of what you actually are. And in those moments, you begin to see the split clearly, not as a concept, as an experience. You feel it. The difference between authenticity and adaptation, between expression and performance. And once you feel that difference, you can't ignore it anymore. Because now you know, the feeling of not being enough was never about what you lack. It was about what you left behind. And that realization is where everything begins to change. And once that realization begins to settle, you stop chasing the feeling. Not completely, but you start to question it. You notice how quickly it appears, how automatically it follows you. Even in moments that should feel complete, you finish something important. And instead of rest, there is evaluation. Instead of satisfaction, there is correction. Instead of presence, there is distance. You look at what you've done, and your mind moves immediately to what is missing, what could have been better, what wasn't enough, what still needs to change. And you begin to see something clearly. The standard you are trying to reach is not stable. It moves. Every time you get closer, it shifts further. Every time you improve, it raises itself. And no matter how far you go, it stays just out of reach. This is not growth. It's pursuit without arrival. A system that guarantees you will never feel complete. Because the goal is not to reach something. It's to keep you moving. Carl Jung would recognize this as the psyche attempting to maintain balance. But when that balance is built on rejection, it becomes distortion. Because what you are trying to achieve is not wholeness. It is perfection. And perfection is not real. It is constructed, built from expectations you absorbed over time, from what you were praised for, what you were criticized for, what you learned to associate with being valued. You internalize those signals. You turn them into standards. And now, you measure yourself against them. Constantly, quietly, without questioning where they came from or whether they are even yours. And that is where the trap deepens. Because the more you chase perfection, the more you distance yourself from reality, from your actual experience, from your actual self. You stop asking, what is true for me? And you start asking, what should I be? And should is where pressure begins. Because should is not grounded in reality. It is grounded in expectation. Expectation you've accepted without awareness. So you try to meet it. You adjust yourself, refine yourself, correct yourself again and again, hoping that eventually it will feel like enough. But it doesn't, because the standard itself is disconnected from who you are. It's built on what you learned was acceptable, not what is authentic. And that disconnect keeps the feeling alive. You move further into the persona, more refined, more controlled, more aligned with expectations, but further away from what is real. And the further you move away, the stronger the feeling becomes. Not enough. Not because you failed, because you are not aligned. You are trying to meet a standard that does not include all of you. And anything that excludes parts of you will always feel incomplete. This is where something difficult emerges. Because if the standard is not real, then the effort built around it begins to feel unstable. You start to question things, not just your progress, your direction. You begin to ask, why doesn't this feel the way I expected? Why do I still feel this way, even after everything I've done? And those questions can feel unsettling because they don't have simple answers. They point inward, toward something deeper, toward the structure you've been operating within. And when you begin to examine that structure, you see something clearly. It was never designed to make you feel whole. It was designed to make you fit. to function, to be accepted, and it succeeded. But wholeness requires something else, not more adjustment, integration, because the parts of you that don't fit the standard are not mistakes. They are information. They show you where you've adapted, where you've suppressed, where you've shaped yourself to match something external. And those parts don't disappear. They remain, influencing how you feel, how you react, how you see yourself, even if you never acknowledge them directly. This is why the feeling persists, because something inside you is not included in the version of yourself you are trying to perfect, and until it is included, the system remains incomplete, no matter how much you achieve, no matter how much you improve, because improvement without integration only strengthens the split. You become better at being partial, more effective, more capable, more controlled, but still divided. And division is what creates that constant sense of something missing, not because something is missing, because something is excluded. And exclusion is something the psyche resists. It creates tension, a quiet pull toward what has been ignored, a sense that there is more than what you are allowing yourself to be. And that sense is not a flaw. It's a signal pointing toward what needs to be seen, not fixed, seen. Because the moment you begin to see it, the dynamic changes. You are no longer trying to eliminate the feeling. You are trying to understand it. You begin to notice what triggers it most. Moments of comparison, moments of evaluation, moments where you measure yourself against something external. And in those moments, you catch the pattern, the immediate shift from experience to judgment, from presence to assessment. And that shift is where the feeling intensifies, because judgment creates distance, distance between you and what you are experiencing, distance between you and yourself. And that distance is what you feel as not enough, not because you are lacking, because you are not present with yourself as you are. You are evaluating yourself from a standard that does not include all of you. And once you see that, you begin to question the standard, not aggressively, quietly. You ask, is this actually necessary? Is this actually true? Or is this something I've been repeating without ever examining? And those questions begin to loosen something. The rigidity, the constant pressure, the automatic judgment. It doesn't disappear, but it weakens, because now you are aware of it. And awareness changes your relationship to it. You are no longer inside the pattern. You are observing it. And that observation creates space, space between you and the voice that says, you're not enough. And in that space, something begins to shift. And in that space, the voice doesn't disappear, but it loses certainty. You begin to hear it without immediately believing it. The same phrases arise, the same quiet judgments. You should be further. This isn't enough. You're still not there. But now, something interrupts it. Not force, awareness. You notice the tone, the repetition, the familiarity of it. And for the first time, you don't follow it automatically. You pause. And in that pause, you begin to see something deeper. That voice is not neutral. It has a direction. It pushes you toward a specific version of yourself. More controlled, more refined, more acceptable. A version that fits. A version that avoids rejection. A version that minimizes risk. And when you look closely, you recognize it. It is the voice that helped you adapt. The one that shaped your persona. The one that guided you toward approval and away from anything that might threaten it. At one point, it was necessary. It helped you belong. It helped you navigate expectations. It helped you become someone who could function within the world around you. But now, it continues to operate as if nothing has changed, as if your role is still to adjust, still to refine, still to become what is expected rather than what is true. And that is where the tension remains, because part of you has outgrown that role. Part of you no longer wants to perform, no longer wants to shape itself around external standards. But the voice continues, repeating the same structure, maintaining the same pressure, trying to keep you within the same boundaries. And that creates conflict, not visible, internal, a quiet resistance to something that once felt normal. You feel it in moments where you hesitate to express yourself, where you filter what you say, where you adjust your reactions to match what is expected. And at the same time, you feel something else, a pull toward honesty, toward expression, toward something that doesn't feel filtered. And the more aware you become, the stronger that pull gets. Because once you see the pattern, you can't fully return to it. You can still follow it, but you feel the cost. You feel the distance between what you express and what you actually feel. And that distance is what keeps the feeling alive. Not enough, because you are still dividing yourself, still choosing one part over another, still maintaining an identity. That does not include everything you are. But now, you begin to question that choice. Not dramatically, quietly. You start to notice how often you suppress something real to maintain something familiar, how often you adjust to avoid discomfort, how often you choose acceptance over authenticity. And each time you notice it, the pattern weakens because awareness removes unconscious permission. You can no longer say, "You didn't see it." You can no longer pretend. It's just how things are. You recognize it as a choice, a subtle one, but a choice. And once something becomes a choice, it can change, not instantly, but gradually. You begin to allow small moments of honesty, not extreme, not disruptive, just real. You say what you actually think. When it matters, you stop correcting yourself. Mid-expression, you let certain reactions exist without immediately filtering them. And those small moments begin to shift something, not your entire identity, your relationship to it. You are no longer fully identified with the persona. You begin to step outside of it, to observe it, to use it when necessary, but not to live entirely within it. And that separation is where integration begins. Because now, you are not rejecting the persona. You are no longer limited by it. You are expanding beyond it, allowing more of yourself to exist, not just what is accepted, what is real. And that includes the parts you once avoided, the parts you judged, the parts you believed made you not enough. Because those parts were never the problem. They were excluded. And exclusion is what created the feeling. So when you begin to include them, the dynamic shifts. Not immediately, but undeniably. The pressure softens. The constant evaluation loses intensity because you are no longer trying to meet a standard that excludes you. You are allowing yourself to exist without constant correction. And in that allowance, something new begins to form. Not confidence, something quieter, stability, a sense of being grounded in yourself without needing to adjust. Every moment, you still grow, you still improve, but it's no longer driven by the need to prove something. It's driven by alignment, by what actually feels true to you. And that changes everything, because now you are not chasing enough. You are moving from wholeness. And wholeness does not demand perfection. It allows complexity, contradiction, depth. It allows you to be more than one thing, to hold opposing traits, to exist without reducing yourself to a single standard. And that is what begins to dissolve the feeling you've been carrying, not because you've achieved more, because you've included more. And what you include no longer needs to fight for your attention. It no longer needs to create discomfort, to be seen, because it already is. And that is where something finally begins to settle within you. And when something finally begins to settle, you stop chasing the feeling of enough. Not because you've reached it, because you no longer measure yourself that way. The scale you were using was never yours. It was built from expectations, from comparison, from a version of you that was designed to fit, not to be whole. And now, you see it clearly. You see how every time you tried to feel enough, you moved further away from yourself because you were adjusting instead of acknowledging, correcting instead of including, improving without understanding what you were leaving behind. But now, that pattern no longer holds the same authority. You recognize it when it appears. That familiar voice, that quiet pressure, that automatic shift into evaluation. And instead of following it, you pause, not to fight it, to see it. Because once something is seen clearly, it loses its control. You don't need to silence the voice. You just need to stop believing that it defines you. And in that moment, something changes. Subtly, but completely. You stop relating to yourself as a problem to fix and start relating to yourself as something to understand, not selectively, completely. You allow contradictions. You allow imperfection. You allow parts of yourself that don't fit into a clean image. And instead of weakening you, that inclusion stabilizes you because there is no longer a part of you pushing against the rest, no longer a hidden resistance, creating tension beneath the surface. Everything is acknowledged, not acted on blindly, but not denied. And that is where real self-trust begins. Not from perfection, from honesty, from knowing that what you feel will not be ignored, that what you see will not be dismissed, that what is true will not be replaced with something more acceptable. And that kind of trust changes how you move through everything. You no longer overanalyze every decision. You no longer hesitate in every moment. You no longer look outward to confirm what you already sense, because you are not disconnected from yourself anymore. You are in contact with it, directly, quietly, consistently. And that contact removes the need to prove anything, because you are no longer trying to become enough. You are no longer trying to reach a version of yourself that will finally be acceptable. You are already including what you once rejected, and that inclusion is what you were actually searching for. Not approval, not validation, wholeness. And wholeness does not feel like intensity. It feels like calm, a grounded sense that nothing inside you needs to be hidden to maintain who you are. You can still grow, still refine, still change, but it's no longer driven by lack. It's guided by awareness. And that difference is everything, because growth from lack never feels complete. Growth from awareness does not need to. It moves naturally, without pressure, without constant comparison, without the quiet voice telling you it's still not enough. And when that voice returns, because it will, you don't follow it. You recognize it. You see where it comes from, and you let it pass without building your identity around it. And that is where freedom begins, not in eliminating the feeling, but in no longer being defined by it. So now, there is only one question left. What part of you have you been leaving out in your attempt to feel enough? Not what do you need to improve. What have you refused to include? What have you labeled as not acceptable and pushed away, even though it's still there? Because that is where your answer is. Not in becoming more, in reclaiming what you left behind. And if something in you recognizes this, don't turn it into another idea. Don't analyze it endlessly. Just notice it. The next time you feel that familiar thought, I'm not enough, pause, not to argue with it, not to replace it, just to see it, without automatically believing it. And then ask yourself, what am I not allowing right now? And whatever comes up, don't reject it. That is where your integration begins. If this made something clear for you, make it real. Write it simply. I am not incomplete. Not as reassurance, as recognition. And if you're ready to stop chasing a version of yourself that was never whole, stay with inner Phoria, not for answers, for awareness. Because the moment you stop trying to become enough, you begin to see you were never missing anything to begin with.